The harbor was still dark when I drove past it that morning, the kind of dark that sits heavy on the water and doesn't let go until well after sunrise. I remember thinking how strange it was that I noticed things like that now. The color of the sky, the way fog clung to the tops of buildings downtown. Things I never paid attention to when I was busy building something I thought was mine. My name doesn't matter much to this story. What matters is that I was 43 years old, owned a commercial flooring company I'd built from a single truck and a used floor sander, had a house in a good neighborhood outside of Nashville, and had been married for 11 years to a woman I believed, without question, was my partner in everything. Her name isn't important either. I'll just call her my wife because that's what she was. That's what I thought she was. This is the story of how I found out I was wrong, what I did about it, and why I have absolutely zero regrets. My flooring company handled commercial contracts, restaurants, office buildings, hotel lobbies, the occasional hospital corridor. Not glamorous work, but the margins were good if you knew how to bid and how to manage a crew. I'd grown it to 22 employees over 14 years. We had a reputation in Nashville for showing up on time and finishing what we started. That reputation was everything to me. I'd poured more of myself into it than I care to admit. My wife worked in marketing for a commercial real estate development firm. She was good at her job, sharp, well-dressed, the kind of person who walked into a room and knew exactly who to talk to first. When we met, I thought that quality was electric. Somewhere over 11 years, I stopped noticing it the way I used to. That was probably my first mistake, though I've stopped beating myself up over it, her boss. I'll call him my wife's boss, because that's the only title he deserves, was the kind of man who built his confidence entirely on the back of other people's work. He had a nice office on the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown, drove a car that cost more than most people's first homes, and had a habit of talking about influence like it was a cologne he wore. I'd met him exactly 4 times, at the company Christmas party 2 years in a row, at a charity golf tournament I got roped into attending, and once, briefly, when I stopped by my wife's office to drop off lunch she'd forgotten at home. Each time he'd shaken my hand with a kind of grip that's trying too hard, looked me in the eye about 1 second longer than necessary, and smiled in a way I couldn't quite place. I'd filed it under guy I don't particularly like and moved on. I was busy. I had bids to submit and crews to manage and a business to run. I didn't have time to decode the social performances of men like him. I should have made the time. The day I found out, I wasn't supposed to be home until evening. I had a site walk scheduled at a hotel renovation downtown, but the project manager called at noon and pushed it back 2 days. I wrapped up some paperwork at the office, told my office manager I was heading out early, and drove home thinking about nothing more complicated than whether I wanted to grill that night or order from the Thai place my wife and I both liked. I pulled into the driveway just after 2 in the afternoon. Her car was there, which surprised me. She didn't usually work from home on Wednesdays. I figured she might have had a half day, or maybe she wasn't feeling well. I grabbed my bag from the back seat and went in through the side door from the garage. The kitchen was empty. There was a glass of wine on the counter, which was unusual for 2 in the afternoon on a weekday, but I didn't think much of it. I set my bag down and was about to call out her name when I heard voices from the living room. 2 voices. I stopped moving. Something in my gut went cold before my brain had fully processed what I was hearing. I stood in the kitchen doorway, and through the half-open living room door, I saw them. My wife was sitting in my chair, not on the couch. In the armchair I'd had since before we were married. The one she used to joke was the ugliest piece of furniture she'd ever seen in her life, but had stopped trying to get rid of, once she realized it wasn't going anywhere. She was sitting sideways in that chair, her legs draped over the armrest, winning against her boss like he was a piece of furniture she'd gotten comfortable with a long time ago. He had his arm around her. They were talking softly, and she was laughing at something he'd said, the way she used to laugh at me when things were easy between us. I stood there for what felt like a long time, but was probably about 4 seconds. Then I walked back into the kitchen, picked up my bag, and went out through the garage the same way I'd come in. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a while. I want to be clear, I did not break down. I did not cry. I felt something I can only describe as a deep, total quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something loud has been going on for so long that you stop carrying it, and then it suddenly stops, and the silence is almost louder than the noise was. It was like something I'd been half aware of for months had just stepped fully into the light, and I was looking at it directly for the first time. I drove to a coffee shop about 2 miles from the house. I ordered a black coffee I didn't really want, and sat at a corner table and thought, I am not an impulsive person, never have been. The flooring business teaches you patience the hard way. You deal with contractors who lie, clients who change their minds mid-project, supply chains that fall apart at the worst possible moment, and you learn to think before you act, or you don't last long. That afternoon in the coffee shop, I called on every ounce of that patience. I did not call my wife. I did not call her boss. I did not call any of my friends because I knew that whatever I said in the next few hours would be repeated, and I wasn't ready for this to be a story people told yet. Instead, I called my brother, who I trust more than anyone alive, and told him I needed to meet. He heard something in my voice and didn't ask questions. He just said, "Where?" My brother and I sat across from each other at that coffee shop table for 2 hours. I told him what I'd seen. He listened. He didn't say, "Are you sure?" or maybe it wasn't what it looked like. He knew me well enough to know I don't report things I'm not sure of. When I finished talking, he asked me one question: "What do you want to do?" I told him. And he nodded and said, "Okay, what do you need from me?" That was when I started making a plan. The first thing I did was nothing. I went home that evening at my normal time, made dinner, listened to my wife talk about her day. She mentioned a project she was working on, mentioned her boss twice in passing with the careful neutrality of someone who was practiced, and I nodded and asked appropriate questions and went to bed and stared at the ceiling until 3 in the morning. I needed to understand the full picture before I moved. Acting on what I'd seen without more information would have been a mistake. Over the next 2 weeks, I gathered that information quietly and carefully. I contacted a private investigator, a woman my brother's attorney had recommended, who specialized in exactly this kind of situation. I gave her what I knew and let her work. While she did, I also had a quiet conversation with my own attorney, a man I'd used for business contracts for 6 years, who was also, as it happened, a sharp and experienced divorce lawyer. He didn't seem surprised to hear from me in that capacity. Apparently, he was used to it. What the investigator confirmed over the following 10 days was worse than I'd expected and exactly as bad as I'd feared. The situation had been going on for somewhere around 14 months. There were hotel receipts, a trip that my wife had told me was a work conference in Atlanta that apparently had only one actual work event and 4 days of everything else, and enough additional documentation to make it clear this was not a casual or recent development. My wife's boss was also, it turned out, not single. He had a wife of his own, a woman I'd never met, who apparently had no more idea than I had. I sat with that information for 3 days before I decided what to do with it. Here's what I did not do. I did not show up at his office. I did not call him. I did not make a scene. I did not send threatening messages or show up anywhere I wasn't supposed to be. What I did instead was methodical, legal, and in my opinion, far more effective than any of those things would have been. My attorney filed the divorce paperwork on a Thursday morning. Because I had documentation of the infidelity in Tennessee as a fault-based divorce state, the grounds were clearly established. My wife was served at her office, which I'll admit I chose deliberately because I wanted there to be witnesses to the moment she understood this was real and that I had known long enough to prepare. I'm not proud of the pettiness of that particular choice, but I'm also not going to pretend it didn't happen. What I had not anticipated, and what turned out to matter significantly, was the business side of things. My flooring company had been hired, about 8 months earlier, to do the flooring installation on a major mixed-use development downtown, a project that my wife's boss's firm was the lead developer on. The contract was worth a substantial amount of money to my company. I had a crew assigned to it, materials ordered, work underway. When the divorce filing became known, which happened faster than I expected because people in professional circles talk, I received a call from my wife's boss's project manager informing me that the development firm was reassessing vendor relationships and that my contract was being terminated. I hung up the phone and called my attorney. The termination violated the contract terms in 3 specific ways that my attorney identified within about 45 minutes of reviewing the document. The timing, combined with the circumstances, made the motivation fairly transparent. We filed a breach of contract lawsuit the following Monday. In the discovery process that followed, a number of things came to light about how my wife's boss conducted business. Cost overruns that had been hidden from investors, a subcontractor dispute that had been settled quietly under an NDA, some decisions about building specifications that certain people with professional oversight responsibilities found interesting once they were asked direct questions about them. I want to be clear that I did not manufacture any of this. I did not plant anything or fabricate documents or make false reports. I simply pursued my legitimate legal claim, answered questions honestly when asked, and allowed the process to do what processes do when the person on the other side has been cutting corners and assuming no one was paying attention. The breach of contract case settled in my favor. The amount covered my legal fees, the value of the terminated contract, and what my attorney described as a meaningful acknowledgement of damages. I won't give the specific number, but I will say it was enough to cover a significant equipment upgrade I'd been putting off for 2 years. The divorce proceedings took about 7 months. My wife, once it was clear what documentation I had and what the legal landscape looked like, did not contest the fault grounds. The settlement was fair. I kept the business, which was established before the marriage and had been funded entirely by my own work and prior savings. The house was sold and divided. I walked away with my company, my equipment, my reputation, and my clarity. During those 7 months, several other things happened that I did not plan, but that I observed with a certain quiet satisfaction. My wife's boss's own wife filed for divorce approximately 6 weeks after mine was initiated. I don't know exactly what she found out or how, and it's not my business. But I'd thought carefully about whether to reach out to her, and ultimately I had my attorney send a carefully worded letter to her attorney noting that certain documentation existed and that she might wish to consult her own legal representation. Whether that played a role, I can't say. I simply felt that she had a right to make informed decisions about her own life. The development firm had a difficult second half of the year. 3 separate institutional investors requested audits following some of the information that emerged during my discovery process. I don't know the full outcome of those audits because by then I had stopped following it closely. I had enough of my own life to pay attention to. My wife's boss was, as of the last information I have, still employed at the firm, though no longer in the same senior role. Apparently there was a reorganization. I heard this secondhand through a contact in the commercial real estate world and felt approximately nothing upon hearing it. I didn't need his destruction. I needed my own restoration. Those are different things, and confusing them is how people end up making decisions they regret. There is a moment I want to describe because I think it matters. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I was at an industry event downtown, the kind of annual thing where contractors and developers and property managers all end up in the same hotel ballroom for an evening, eating mediocre food and making the kind of small talk that sometimes turns into actual business. I was standing near the bar talking with a general contractor I'd worked with several times when I looked across the room and saw my wife's boss. He saw me at almost the same moment. I want to tell you there was a dramatic confrontation. There wasn't. We looked at each other across that ballroom for about 3 seconds. He looked away first. I went back to my conversation with the general contractor, who was telling me about a warehouse project that turned into a very good contract for my company. My wife's boss left the event early. I stayed until the end. That was enough. That was actually more than enough. The flooring company is doing well. I hired 2 additional crew members last spring, and we've taken on some larger commercial contracts that I'm proud of. I've been working with a therapist, something I should have done years earlier regardless of any of this, and it has been useful in ways I didn't expect. I spend more time with my brother and his family than I used to. I coach a youth basketball team on Saturday mornings, which I started doing on something of an impulse about a year ago, and which has turned out to be one of the best decisions I've made in recent memory. I am not going to tell you I'm completely over it, because I don't think that's how it works. 11 years is a long time to build a life with someone. The version of that life I believed I had was real to me, even if it wasn't entirely real, in fact. Grieving that is legitimate and it takes as long as it takes. But I will tell you this. I have not spent a single moment regretting how I handled it. I gathered information before I acted. I used legal means to protect what was mine. I did not make public scenes or threaten anyone or do anything that cost me the one thing I was most determined to protect, which was my own character. The business I built is still standing. My name in this industry still means what it meant before any of this happened. My integrity, which is the only thing that was ever genuinely mine, is intact. The man who spent 14 months in my house, sitting in my chair, is dealing with audits and a reorganization and a divorce of his own. I did not cause those things by doing anything wrong. I caused them by doing everything right. There is a lesson in that, and I think you know what it is. The harbor is gray this morning. I can see it from the window of my new apartment, which is smaller than the house but has this view that I find I don't get tired of. The ferry boats are running. There are birds over the water. It is very quiet, and the quiet is good, and I am fine. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that story. Not the betrayal itself, but the sequence of cause and effect that ran underneath it like a current nobody could see, until it surfaced all at once. My wife's boss spent years believing that power meant you could take what you wanted without consequence. He took credit for other people's work. He cut corners on buildings where people would eventually live and work. He looked at a married woman and decided that her husband wasn't paying attention, so the rules that applied to everyone else didn't apply to him. Each of those choices was a brick he laid himself in a wall he was eventually going to walk into. I didn't build that wall. I just stopped standing in front of it. That's the part I want you to sit with, because I think it's the part that gets missed when people tell stories like this. The outcome wasn't about my anger, or my planning, or even my attorney. It was about the fact that a man who operates without integrity eventually generates the conditions of his own collapse. All I had to do was document reality clearly, pursue what was legally mine, and refuse to lower myself to the level he was operating on. The truth did the rest. What I learned about myself through all of this is harder to talk about, but more important. I had been a person who worked hard and trusted quietly, and assumed that the life I was building was what it appeared to be. That's not naivety. That's a reasonable way to live. But I had also stopped asking questions I should have been asking, stopped paying attention to things I should have noticed, let busyness substitute for presence. That's on me, and I've had to sit with it honestly. Integrity isn't just about how you respond when things go wrong. It's about the daily practice of showing up honestly in your own life, with your partner, your work, the people who depend on you. When I look back at the years before any of this happened, I can see places where I was physically present but mentally somewhere else entirely, building something external while neglecting something internal. The business was growing. The marriage was quietly hollowing out. I was watching the wrong thing. That's not a justification for what my wife did. Her choices were her own, made with full knowledge of what they meant. But if I'm going to stand here and talk about cause and effect, I have to include my own chapter in that story honestly. The resilience part, and this is what I want to leave you with, is not about bouncing back quickly. It's about refusing to let someone else's failure become your identity. My wife's boss tried to end my contract because he felt threatened. I could have internalized that as a statement about my worth. Instead, I filed the paperwork, let the process work, and came out the other side with a stronger business and a clearer sense of who I am than I had going in. You don't need to destroy the person who wronged you. You need to protect what is genuinely yours, your character, your work, your ability to look at yourself clearly in the morning. Everything else tends to sort itself out when you hold that line. I'm holding it, and I'm fine.